Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this Techstrong learning experience brought to you by the AI Infrastructure Alliance. My name is Cody, and I'm happy to welcome you back to another edition of Techstrong Learning. We've got an exciting panel ahead, but before we get things kicked off, I do have just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review. First, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or maybe share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude this live session today. So we do have a panel, and that means there's going to be lots of engagement. So there are a couple of ways that you can do so. The first way that you can engage with us is through the chat tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. So I'd like you to start testing that function out for us right now by letting us know from where you are joining us. We have a global panel, and so I'm sure we have a global audience, and we'd love to see where everyone's from. If you have any questions, we do highly recommend you send those into the Q&A tab, as that just kind of helps us keep them in our queue. Also, before we close out, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around for the duration of our panel today. So our topic is security in AI, and I am joined by a massive panel. Our panel consists of Gunter Ullman, CTO at Devo, Bala Satyamurthy, Chief Information Security Officer at Atlassian, Ram Ramamurthy, Director of AI Research at Zoho Corporation, Brian Roche, Chief Product Officer at Veracode, Lee Baker, General Secretary at the AI Infrastructure Alliance, and Mike Vazar, Chief Content Officer here at Techstrong Group. So to our entire panel, thank you so much for joining us today. I didn't figure out who was going to be taking over, so Mike, Lee, I'll pass it over to one of you.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Cody. I can take this from here. So welcome to AI Times, and potentially one of the most important panels I think we've ever had. With the hype machine behind large language models and the likes of ChatGPT, this I think is the single biggest question or concern for practitioners in the AI space. So I'm very pleased to say that we've got a strong panel to address the challenge. So let's dive straight in. My first question, we're seeing, as I said, a lot of hype around large language models, but with that hype, we're also seeing kind of new attacks on AI and ML systems developing. Adversarial attacks, model poisoning, evasion attacks. What does this all mean, and can you provide a little bit of context to what that means to attack an ML system? And Ram, I think, am I picking on you first?
Yeah, surely. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining live, and those who are watching the recording. Thank you, and we'll get started. Yes, the hype around large language models has been crazy right now, and every business or every individual is trying to see how do I put this emerging technology into my workflow. And we have been seeing that with AI. It's always overhyped and under delivering, and that's why we see the AI summers and winters going on. But these large language models are definitely a breakthrough, given how the technology has evolved over the years. When it comes to security attacks, I mean, these models have their own innate set of problems, things like being biased, things like concept drift, where the model was trained on some form of data, but then the real world has changed. These are essentially some problems of these models. But looking into the security threats that can come into these models, I think broadly there are two places in which there could be issues. The first thing is poisoning the model you're using to train the data. You add random stuff into it. You wantedly go add malicious stuff into it so that the predictions go bad and the model is really bad. And the problem is the whole technology of AI is very correlation dependent, meaning no, it's not causation first. It's like, oh, this variable happens, then this is bound to happen. And now there are a lot of ways in which you could pollute this training data, and then the model could act in crazy ways. And increasingly, we are using AI in a lot of decision automation. We've been talking about process automation over the last decade, and now it's all about decision automation and when an AI makes a wrong decision, things are going to go awful. Let's say things like self-driving, things like healthcare, things like credit processing, things like recruitment. You don't want your AI systems to take a wrong decision because the data has been poisoned. And number two is where you look at the inference. I mean, there are a lot of cases where you add noise to the data that you're passing through the AI model for getting the inference. Adversarial attacks, right? So where you should have all seen that image where you add some noise and the model predicts the image as something else. And so one is at the model level and two is at the inference data level where you add noise so as to confuse the AI model. And beyond all of this, there are other places in which attacks could happen, which could include unauthorized access into the repository where the model is created and trained, or unauthorized access into the data set and then stealing the data set. These are the usual web security practices. I think they should be taking care of them. So summarizing broadly, three things: one is data poisoning to train when training the model, two is model poisoning during inference where you're trying to add adversarial attack into it, and three, all the other typical security caveats in your code infrastructure and your typical IT infrastructure.
I would agree with all that. I think we can almost answer that question ourselves, and by asking ChatGPT, that we've seen a trend for developers moving towards having GPT write code, and so a lot of these attacks and these automated attacks will come from code that's written or generated by ChatGPT. So I think you can begin to look at that as a source for some of these, and naturally the frequency of that is going to continue, which is probably a good segue into like the how developers and how the patterns of usage has changed, right? I mean, for me, I think ChatGPT is the new Stack Overflow, where developers are uploading their code or copying pasting code from GPT. And so I think we're starting to see this become more pervasive, and ultimately that's going to lead to IP leakage and other concerns, which I'm sure we'll talk about here. But I agree with you, Ram.
Bala, let me ask you a follow-up question to that, because you guys have been at the forefront of building some of these LLMs. Are there a set of best practices for AI security that you guys incorporated into the building of the models? I mean, what did you guys think about as you were building some of your models?
So, so first of all, we are not building our own custom models yet. We are using models from providers like OpenAI. I think going back to the attacks we're talking about, at the end of the day, I think for us, it's all about the basics. Like I think Brian was saying that we need to make sure that we are protecting our IP and not allowing that to be put in open systems, just like we would be worried about, like the example he just gave, as developers could copy code into a site to just decode a string or beautify with JavaScript. I think we are trying to make sure that those are basics which we take care of. And even though this is a new technology and we're talking about, there's a lot of hype, like we talked about, we talk about all kinds of novel attacks. I think for us, it's actually just back to basics, making sure that we are protecting our customers' data and using it in a way which is compliant with our policies. And so that's where we are. I mean, in terms of like the attacks we talked about, injection attacks, they are nothing new. I mean, they are just in a different form from our perspective. So I think it's about going back to the basics. Things are evolving, so we really can't predict. The places where we really worry about is automation, where we don't want machines to do everything, and we want human to be in the loop at the end of the day when some critical decisions are being made. So those are, again, like those are the kind of guardrails we are building to make sure that we use this technology responsibly.
Yeah, if I can add a little part to that, and that is that I think it's, as with any technology, there are so many attack vectors, right? For many organizations, their use of AI and machine learning and other data science tools have increased the attack surface, right? And that's with any and every technology. I look at it slightly different, and that is, I spent much of my career being the adversary themselves, right? My job for decades has been to to break this stuff. Right? And so I think it's a key part is to understand, it's great to understand the attack techniques, but the key thing really is to understand what the adversary hopes to gain in these parts, right? And so when I look at many of the sort of the models, many of the technologies that are out there, the first thing goes through my head is, well, how do I monetize that from an adversary's perspective? Right, and I think that plays into a big way of how you assess the risk, assess the value that we associate with those models, and how you go to seek to protect them. So, for example, a lot of these sort of ones are, if I look at the data that's going into trained models, there's a lot of intellectual property that's going into the model itself. So, for example, many organizations have taken and exposed, the last 10 decades worth of their sales processes and distilled that into a model, and then it provided that as an interface to the rest of the world. For an adversary to be able to take that 10 years worth of knowledge in a 1 megabyte size model and to be able to query it or extract that data and to leverage that training, that information to recreate that model in their own sense. That's one of the ways to monetize the attack and the attack techniques, right? And so when I look at that, and now let's say for the team here is to really look at what's the benefit for the attacker apart from public news stories and some great fun pieces about how I reprogram something and got ChatGPT to answer this type of question. Really look at how an adversary would monetize.
I love that, the kind of the forensic approach of understand the motives and the kind of the ambition of the adversary. So if we understand from what Bala and Ram are talking about in terms of techniques and Gunther's talking about in terms of profile and ambition, Brian, what do we need to do to defend ourselves better from these types of attacks? Do we need to harness AI increasingly, more in our defense? Is there something we can do from a regulatory point of view? Where what's in the arms race? What's the next step?
Well, I think so as a DevOps practitioner, right, and I'm sure many people on the webinar are also very familiar with DevOps and lean startup practices. I think that the first notion that we have to embrace is that software can change in any step of the SDLC. So really the big question is, and Gunther, I agree with you, there is an explosion of the attack surface. And Bala, I agree with you that there is the potential risk of pollution with large language models or the transformer architecture, because the results that these tools produce are only as good as the data that they're being trained on. So obviously I'm the CPO at Veracode, and our mission is to bring developers and security teams together to enable them to deliver secure code in every step of the SDLC. So the first step, Lee, is to make sure that you've got the right tools in place that are going to enable you to detect and maybe even forecast or predict what's going to happen, and then even an automated way to resolve those findings. Bala, we took a slightly different approach. So we recently released a product called Veracode Fix, and Veracode Fix was actually based on a curated data set. So we still used the transformer architecture, but we built our own data set. And I think that's a lot of companies ignore their competitive advantage, which is the data they have in their systems. And so instead of having all this code go off premise, what we now are using is our large language model trained on our data set to essentially produce security recommendations for developers for the code that has changed or for vulnerabilities that are found in every step of the SDLC. So I think that the best defense for us is to recognize, your attack surface has already sprawled, and code can change in any step in the SDLC. So the question is, how do you bring about the right set of tools that can detect it, but also in an automated way put at your fingertips the controls that you need in order to be able to counter some of these attacks? Because I think that the frequency, the sophistication of these attacks has already been increased by the explosion of GPT and LLMs.
Gunther, as somebody who breaks things, would you go after the model as it's being trained, or would you go focus more on the inference engines where the deployment is, and maybe figure that the attack surface out there might be a little less well defended?
It depends on my objective, right? So, when I've spent a lot of my time sort of working against state adversaries, and well-funded adversarial groups, right? And in one case, in one category, going after that training data is particularly important. So, for example, there are a lot of very sophisticated systems out there that are constantly tracking the infrastructure that an adversary is using, whether that is for their phishing attacks or for targeted attacks. They have an agile global infrastructure, right? And there is years of historical data and reputation systems to understand whether or not a new domain name or a transfer an IP address is going to be used maliciously. And for those types of adversaries, being able to influence that historical data, be able to influence all of the reputation scores that are used is of critical importance. So I see that for state adversaries in particular, and large global organized crime going after those data feeds themselves. On the other side, what I've found is while there are great automated tools for being able to query a model or a model engine and extract the knowledge that lays behind that model, more often than not, it's just more efficient to go for the server that hosts the model and to steal the model electronically that way, right? As one data blob today. So, the good thing about being I'm from the hacker side is always look for the lazy, easiest option and exploit that first. But I would also look at it in a slightly different way, and that is that the way that the adversaries are actually using machine learning and AI themselves to launch the attacks and actually and investigate these things. So the ability to steal a model by inference is largely no longer done through a bit of scripts and things. It's now actually trained models that are actually trained to extract and the inferences from those models and to do it at superhuman speed. Right, so I think there's a huge change that's underway, but I think for many of these larger models, especially things like the growth, phenomenal growth of large language models, and the lack of awareness from many organizations that are pushing up their own internal data into those models. There's some very exciting research and exciting tooling that's being made to extract that new pool of confidential information from these large language models that are open source or publicly available.
Yeah, one thing to add that maybe adding more explainable AI models could help the humans understand. Is there an adversarial attack, or has the model been poisoned? And in fact, in the enterprises, we see the AI usage growing up when we add explainable AI, because most of the times people are building workflows around the decision that the AI model is taking. So I think the same thing can be applied to, but again, today's state of explanation is more considered as an afterthought. There is a huge language model that is giving out stuff, and then you add a small surrogate model to add explanations to the predictions of the model. So I think important when it comes to.
Did we all lose Ram?
I think we may have.
So as Ram comes back, I wanted to first of all, I wanted to make a slight correction, Brian, what you were saying. We are going to use our custom data because that's our secret sauce. I think the point I was trying to make is that we don't want to commingle individual customers' data, and we want to make sure that the data we use to train is in the context of an individual customer and not like cross-pollinate between customers, especially not without keeping our privacy policies and all the responsible technology principles we have in place. Going back to the attacks, I think maybe Gunther knows this better than me. I always feel like at the end of the day, the weakest link in the chain is the user. So any place where we talk about a lot of sophisticated attacks, but at the end of the day, I think it's about education and training users. From our perspective, a large company, we have 10,000 users and 10,000 employees, and we have to be like, those are our weakest links. And like we're talking about, putting our own proprietary data into these models, we want to make sure that we have protection to the edge, make sure that what sites people are using. So all the basic things we do, I think I worry a lot about, again, humans being the weakest link in this chain. I don't know how you see that, Gunther.
Which is probably a good segue right into, since this explosion has occurred, how are we all thinking about it within our organizations? I mean, we've seen Sam Altman travel around the EU, I think it's this week, talking about AI regulations. Like, is your organization, think about, and maybe people can engage on the chat and let us know what they're doing, how their companies think about it. Are people shutting down the usage of ChatGPT or Bard, or pick your favorite version, or are they looking at putting responsible frameworks and guidelines or guardrails to using this technology? I mean, I know certainly we had to contemplate how and when do we want our developers to use GPT? Is it okay to have it write certain fragments of code? If so, what fragments of code? Should you give it code, or should you upload your code? I think, Bala, that's what you were talking about, which is the responsible implementation of AI and the prevention of IP leakage. Maybe we should sort of debate this for a couple of minutes, how we, in light of the fact that we don't have constraints and regulations and guardrails, how do we think about it within our organization? And Gunter, I know that this is a big part of what you do every day.
Yeah, so at a couple, and maybe I'll drop a link into the chat here, is that in mid-March, DEVA released a commission study with Wakefield Research on this topic. And so, interesting enough, I think one of the things was that 96% of IT security professionals admit to finding someone in the organization using AI tools that were not provided or authorized by the company. Meanwhile, only about 80% actually admitted to doing it, right? So I think there's a bit of a gap between those two parts there. Yeah, I think, so it's prevalent. I think for one of the better term, AI use is now the new shadow IT for organizations, right? So it's prevalent there. I think much of the tooling that's sophisticated, or at least contemporary sophisticated organizations that have their own security operations center, have the right tooling in place to be able to detect these threats. At least they log in the right data, they have access and visibility across their network and across their users. However, they have to modify the type of reporting, the type of analytics, and the types of outputs and the alerts that they want to create against this. And I think that's where the gap is today, in being able to decipher that data and be able to understand the current exploitation of that attack surface. And like many things in these areas, where do you prioritize first? Is it do I block all users from doing something, or do I find the users that are doing the most egregious things and target them first? So I think every organization is different, but I would sort of highlight that the tooling for detecting and mitigating these threats remains largely unchanged. What changes is the emphasis, the reporting, and the prioritization against these tools and use.
I think when you tell all users not to do something, more users do it, right? So that's
yeah, definitely amen to that. Bartlett, Goods is kind of making the point around kind of every organization needs to cut its cloth accordingly, and Brian kind of raises the question around kind of what's the nature of your guardrails in place. To your mind, outside of kind of the data science divisions and the MLOps Center of Excellence, how are you training? How are you educating your teams and your staff around these themes? Because it is complex in nature, and whilst we're all citizen data scientists now, it's quite tricky to wrap your head around. How do you go about educating the org?
Right. So, like I was saying, AI is a very powerful technology, and we have to use it with care. And I think this is kind of the time for us to focus on how we can enable, but also have the guardrails. So to answer your questions, it goes back to the basics, right? Like if you make it easy, like I think Mike was saying, the more you try to prevent, we are not trying to like stop things because we know developers are smart enough to, and the users are smart enough to work around us. I think it's about educating and making it easy to do the right thing. So one of the ways we are doing this is we are building an abstraction layer on top of all AI powered technologies we will use so that it's a platform people can use and some basic controls we would like are baked into it, right? So we provide that and we ask our developers to use those, what you would call paved paths is the only way for us to scale. And that's kind of what we are focusing on. So it's education, providing tooling, providing an abstraction so that people can use a standard way of implementing that. That's the only way we can do that at scale for a company of our size. See, that's where our focus is. So it's education, building tooling, and making it easy to do the right thing, and that drives adoption. Along with that, of course, we have all the expected guardrails, right? We are even watching all of our traffic egressing from our network, and to make sure that we are not going to domains, and we are looking at the data just like we would do with any DLP capability to make sure that we are not, we are detecting and alerting when we see some internal data or PII getting out of our systems.
Hey, Ram, are you with us? Let me see if I can get you back online. Yeah. Awesome. Do you think that all of this focus on AI and security is going to make us all may get a little bit better at data management? Because, honestly, we've not been very good at that collectively over the years. And, are we going to clean up our act finally?
Yeah, Mike. So this has been a major challenge because a lot of times when trying to build these models, the data residing in a developer's machine and the parts of data, because a lot of times all of these AI developers, their job is to clean the data and then try running random experiments on the data so that the model does not overfit, at the same time the model does not underfit and all that. So the first thing we did in Manage Engine and Zoho Corp was to streamline how do we handle data, right? So it could be publicly available data, it could be our own proprietary data, but we've ensured all the data resides within our data centers and everything is access controlled the same way we look at code, right? So we have proper policies built around how AI developers are building the data. That way we don't have any unauthorized access coming into training the model. And from an usage perspective, we're also looking at what Bala said, very similar to, we're trying to build a platform where all of our employees can come in and use all of these large language models, but at the same time, there is a PII vetting through it. We're trying to see how, what kind of information leaves the data center, leaves our secure infrastructure, and so on.
I don't know if you guys can that, but an interesting comment in there. Let me see. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to it from participant 427. Security and outbound traffic on AI engines enable restricted data block suppression. So it looks like some people are just essentially shutting down the usage of AI and ML models. And what's interesting, I think, is you just shared the article around. What was the study reveals 8 out of 10 professionals are using in an unauthorized way AI tools in the workplace. So I guess the question that is top of mind for me is, are we trying to fight against a tidal wave that is coming at us? And I think, Gunter, you were saying this, that the technology, the sophistication, the large language models have changed the way in which we can be attacked. Yet developers are almost racing to stand still, using the same tools, trying to overcome security technical debt. And what we're seeing is just tech debt accumulating and increasing in our backlogs. I mean, I think this is the big question, I think, on everybody's mind.
Yeah, I would just call out, we've had two kind of participants in the chat recognize that they're not using business data, they don't feel that they're ready. There does feel a sense that this is a big inhibitor for ML success and model implementation. Gunther, to your point, how much is this going to hold us back, and how much is, are we just kind of fingering the dam and it's going to burst anyway?
Well, I mean, if history is going to show us anything, I'll go back to the whole sort of thing about shadow IT, right? The tools sort of changed, the reporting sort of changed out, right? So, when shadow IT suddenly became the key thing, people were using their company credit cards or their personal credit cards to sign up for this and that. We saw the explosion of CASB technology, right? So cloud access security broker tooling, at the time, and those tools have basically, I think, Gartner no longer even categorizes those tools or provides reports on these sort of things anymore. So I think there's a knee-jerk reaction, but those technologies get rolled into better, more organized sort of SOC tooling and SOC analytics capabilities. So I don't see a problem with it, right? The tooling's there, the awareness is there, maybe some of the education and building that into the operational processes needs to sort of happen there. I would sort of highlight, though, the changes that happen beyond that. So there is the aspect of, there are tools out there, and frankly, you should have you should be applying the same data rules, the data governance that you've applied for the business for the last 20 years, as far as, classification of data, controls over education on that. I think what's sort of changing that's more important really is, for the last 3-4 years, I've been very involved in adversarial machine learning, right? And it's something that, for the audience here, certainly the panel here, we've all been touching on this for a year or two. It wasn't until ChatGPT, started growing, 10 million users within the first month that suddenly the consumer side started to see and start to use it, right? And so the explosion that sort of happens on that front, right? And I think that's more of an interesting reflection of the sort of the AI and the delta between the use cases and the need versus the technical processes to detect, mitigate these threats, right? So I think that IT teams are on the back foot now of understanding and being able to report out the threats in this space. I think is one of the things that I'm sort of seeing really today.
I'd like to give a shout out to participant number 118 who says blocking isn't going to work. It's like telling teenagers not to drink. And that's pretty much par for the course. And he seems to be recommending that, the best case is to, create some guidance for usage of AI, run it through a portal, track what people are doing, and make sure they don't do something silly. So, Ram, is that the best course of action, or what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
yeah, I could say the same. Like, the organizations which are trying to stop usage of this is a futile effort, because this thing is so powerful that we do want to use it, because that otherwise you have a disadvantage as a business. So I think it's not about stopping, it's about how to use it responsibly, how to use it ethically, how to make sure that you're applying all the principles of privacy and what customers expect. I think that's where the focus should be, and not to try to stop it. This is just that's like a losing battle.
Brian, I want to loop in a thread that you've got going with on the chat here around kind of security teams kind of sprinting to stand still, which I think is a very interesting theme that in your words, we're accruing security debt. What does that mean now that AI has put that debt acclamation on steroids? Where do we see ourselves in 2, 5, 10 years time, when these attacks are only going to proliferate, and the tools required to combat are going to be that so much more complex and dependent?
Yeah, I think that and somebody was having a back and forth with me on the chat there. I think the answer, or the one question that is top of mind for me, is in 10 years, do we essentially have automated attacks that are responded to with automated responses, right? So our machines essentially combating machines. I think that the right course of action is to, as I said, accept that code is going to change everywhere and anywhere. Shadow IT is a real thing. They're going to be making changes in production that may result in, you know, opening up ports or creating a vulnerable infrastructure. So the question is, how can we detect that, and how can we, in an automated way, bring the principles of automation to bear in order to be able to combat this? You know, my position on this, obviously, being a chief product officer and setting the vision and strategy for large organization, is to leverage AI to be able to detect and present potential resolution for some of the vulnerabilities that are found. I think there's, you know, Bali, you talked about this, right? Like putting the control in the hands of developers to decide what they want to accept as an automated fix, because I think that in the early access testing that we had done around AI and ML, it was clear to us that organizations said, listen, you like, no pull requests. You don't go get to check in code on our behalf. We still want our developers to accept these recommendations. So, but I do think that there are certain cases where in areas of infrastructure or container usage, when vulnerabilities or attacks are detected, that we can bring automation where it's just, you know, these redeploying a container is not contentious. Redeploying a secure container with a more secure base image is not contentious, right? So I think that the answer is going, I forecast the answer is, how do we leverage AI not as the existential threat, but as a means to drive better business outcomes? And how do we leverage AI as a means to combat what we know are going to be like unprecedented and sophisticated levels of attacks? I will say that in the chat, somebody commented that they don't believe that cybersecurity was ready for the cloud. And I completely agree. Like we are simply seeing developers and their tech debt, their security debt and their tech debt accumulate over time with no real way to do what you just described, Gunter, which is, can I see risk and context? And can I point my developers at the activities that are going to bring about the greatest value, whether it's driving down security debt or technical debt? So I think leveraging AI as a means to combat, I think is the answer here.
I mean, I might add a slightly different flavor to this, and that is, you know, we can learn from our lessons, right? One of the lessons that I have is many years ago, there was the technology, you know, intrusion detection systems, or IDS. Great companies like Internet Security Systems, ISS, you know, came up with, you know, intrusion prevention systems, right? So change that D to a P. And do everything automatically. And still today, as a fundamental technology, you know, 80% of IPS is only deployed as IDS because people don't quite trust the automation around there to block stuff. And so I sort of look at you know, AI really changing fundamentally, you know, the way that we actually operate in the security context across our business, and I think leveraging the psychology of this, right? So I see the greatest advances in AI as an augmentation tool for the human analyst in this space, right? And that augmentation will increase in sophistication and use, you know, in minutes per hour of time consumed or, you know, recovered through these things. But I think there's a progression there, and the analogy I've been using has been that we're now at the second generation of Mr. Clippy, right? So, you know, sort of dear user, I see you're trying to do this. You know, would you like me to fix it for you? Would you like me to do it better? Would you like me to do this for you? You know, dear user, you've done it 3 times this way before. Would you just like me to do it for the numbers 4, 5, 10 further on for you this way? Or, you know, I think one of the advantages of the cloud is, you know, this collective intelligence, and that is, you know, dear user, it looks like you're trying to do this. What you're trying to do looks like what other people have solved around the world doing this way. Would you like me to, you know, suggest or do this for you? And I think there's the reinforcement, there's the buy-in, you know, and you know, this is where the AI really comes into the fore of augmenting it, but helping to pull the user along the journey, as opposed to a transition of responsibility into the AI completely.
Well, I mean, we started out this discussion by talking about what kinds of attacks and sophistication do we think will occur as a result of GPT or whatever your favorite chatbot is, or AI and ML. I think. Sorry, did you guys go away? Did I lose you?
No,
I can see you.
I can hear.
Well, maybe we did lose him for a second there. Hey, Paula, you there? I'm going to jump over to you for 2 seconds and then come back to Brian.
Yeah, I'm here. Just to on the last point, what Gunther was saying, I think I want to just go back and reemphasize that, yeah, AI is a powerful technology and it should be seen as a thing to help and augment. But when it comes to making any critical decisions, you always have to have the humans in the loop. And so there needs to be a boundary there where not everything should be automated. There are critical functions. You do want humans in the loop. Mike, what were you going to say?
Well, one of our attendees is suggesting that our security friends might be engaging in a certain amount of FUD here, and they're basically saying that the only security threats resulting from this are leakage of IP, and as a result, we don't need all this heavy-handed cybersecurity infrastructure. I know Brian and Gunther are probably smiling, but from your perspective, what is the real nature of the cybersecurity threat?
Apologies, I froze there. I guess imagine a world where you're leveraging AI to identify the fingerprints of an attack while it's in flight. And I do think we certainly see plenty of evidence where developers are now leveraging ChatGPT to create more sophisticated attacks. So I certainly, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that they're using this tool in a nefarious way. Bala, I cut you off.
No, I think to answer Mike's question, I don't think it's necessarily a FUD, right? I think it's still very new, and it's all the technology itself is like, we look around every week, something new shows up, so it's evolving really fast, right? So I don't think it is a very different kind of technology. So even the kind of attacks we may see are going to be more sophisticated and different. So I don't think we're trying to spread FUD, at least from my perspective. That's the way I think about it. I think it's about trying to stay on top of it, right? And what my point was that, yes, we always have to go back to the basics, right? I think we should never lose sight of that. I think we can keep playing with new things, and there's going to be an arms race where the technology is going to be able to come up with new attacks, and hopefully defenders will be using the same technologies to up their game, right? So I think that's the way I'm thinking about it. So it's not really a FUD. It really is something which is moving fast, and we need to keep up.
So I might change it a little bit, and that is, so we sort of covered about the attacks against the AI, and attacks against the data that is being used and populated in that. I think understanding the history is a key part for understanding where the next threats lie, right? And for the last 3 decades, the primary tool for compromise, and breaches has been malware, right? And malware has gone through many phases, and for the last 2 decades, polymorphic malware has been the tool of choice for professionals and professional organizations and cybercrime and all this part, right? What I'm seeing is the use of AI is replacing many of that sort of the ecosystem around there of waterhole attacks, the ability to go create new domains, draw unsuspecting users to a site that's trusted, click on things, and install software and software packages in that, right? So historically, those tools have been very successful, and they've been countered through cloud-based detection systems, anti-spam technologies that have been probably at the forefront for many years in the use of artificial intelligence, and machine learning. What I'm seeing though is that those adversaries are now taking up those same tools and are able to craft individual attacks at huge scales with point precision and knowledge about the targets, the target environment, and to change at a pace that is unmatched with which used to have a team of 20 software engineers working in Russia, Ukraine, creating malware. Is now done, is now done, and is moved in from polymorphic to exomorphic type of attacks, right? And so what I am seeing and forecasting is that at the fundamental level is the same nature of attacks, the same nature of threats. However, the pace, the diversity, and the extreme targeting and personalization of the attacks is going to phenomenally increase, right? And that translates to me that for organizations, especially security teams that have spent decades focusing on, I have a team of 5 analysts, and my adversary, I may have 100 adversaries targeting me, and maybe 1,000 people that support them. It was still a very human-to-human type of adversary relationship. What we now have is that those adversaries are operating at industrial scale, and industrial tooling, and leveraging AI faster than the organizations that are seeking to detect, defend, and respond to that. And I think that is the gap, right? The tooling, the understanding of the nature of the base of the threat remains the same, but the scale, the sophistication, the pace changes.
Yeah,
interesting comment in the chat about the singularity, which I think we all broadly understand as the time when machines become more intelligent than humans, right? And they significantly impact our society. I think early estimates in the past were somewhere between 2045 and 2050, I think it has here. But and then somebody said, do we think that this is upon us? What do we think? Do we think that I'll go first. I certainly don't think this singularity is going to happen in the next couple of years. I think it's maybe 10 years out. But what do you guys think?
So I was just going to get to this actually, Brian, because I think the participant who posted this talking about and it wouldn't be an AI panel without predicting the singularity. One of the things that they reference here is around kind of deep learning models developing their own protocols for communication, and I think perhaps they might be referencing the Facebook models, the Facebook experimentation that was abandoned because they were seeing that their programs chatting to themselves in their own kind of language protocols. Is that something that we should be concerned about when, Gunther talked about augmentation to tackle this industrial scale of attack? So we've got machines talking to machines. Should we be concerned that the human is being taken out of the loop in that example? Bala, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think first to answer the question about singularity, I feel like it's further away than people would want to believe. So I think this is where it's important, where the systems which have the capability, if they have, for instance, if you put plugins and the AI can actually start taking actions and is able to coordinate with other systems outside. So I think, you have to be careful not to let systems talk without it being monitored. And so putting a system which has all these capabilities on the edge and you really don't have any control over it is just like asking for it. And so I think from my perspective, I think we have to make sure that if systems have capabilities, that there are guardrails against it. So if you allow certain actions to be taken automatically, like you want to make sure that there are some boundary constraints on that. So
and I think the principal fear for everybody is if an implementation like ChatGPT can talk to other implementations, then they are getting, I don't know if it's exponentially, but they're certainly getting smarter. And so the connected nature of this means that it's very difficult to turn it off, right? And I think that's one of the concerns leading to a singularity, or leading to intelligence greater than humans, right? I think so you're advocating, Bala, that these large language models should not talk to each other?
No, I mean, if they do, there should be guardrails. I don't think I'm saying we should not. It should be something where we do have guardrails. So, for instance, like if you have an AI model which is able to take input and we don't have proper standardization and it's able to take input and execute, it's like a server-side attack, a classic server-side attack, where if the system has unlimited access into your infrastructure, then obviously like you're missing guardrails where somebody could direct these systems to take actions behind the scenes. So they've just breached your firewall. It's the same kind of scenario which exists today, in my opinion.
So Brian, let me follow up with that on you specifically. So originally we had DevOps, right? And then we had DevSecOps, and now we have MLOps, and eventually I imagine we'll have MLSecOps, and then we're going to have DevMLSecOps, right? Is there another way of thinking about this whole thing from in the beginning of putting these guardrails together in a way that maybe doesn't have this, weird dependency between data scientists and developers and security people? And, can we come at this in maybe a more cohesive fashion?
Yeah, I mean, look,
sorry, go ahead.
Mike, I'm sorry, you were breaking up. To make sure was that to me, Mike?
Yeah, sure. Brian, go first, and then Ram jump in.
No, Ram, you go ahead. I've talked, I think, more than you. You go ahead.
Okay.
So I think, like I said before, I don't know if it was here, I got cut off. So the explainable AI is something that can really help here. And, what level of write and execute access do you give to your AI models is something very important. Now, as we speak about these AI attackers getting smart, the defense is also getting stronger. So traditionally, we were all dependent on static rules, right? Let's say Gunter talked about malware, right? So we had malware coming in, and then we had Yara rules, and anybody who can just fly under these Yara rules is able to make a good malware. Now, the scale in which these malwares and ransomwares are being generated with the help of AI, the defense technology has also grown. It's not about one point of authentication; it is continuous authentication. All of a sudden, we find a user continuously exporting passwords, and this user and entity behavior analysis comes in and stops it. Same time, looking at malware and ransomware, doing continuous entity behavior analysis can help us stop. So, putting the right guardrails for your AI systems. I think the fear of AI singularity is still very high. I don't think we really have to worry about AI singularity, but it's more like a server-side attack where you have something that has the power to go read, write, execute across your systems, and then there is an adversarial attack coming through it. So that I think our traditional security combined with a lot of AI security defense should stop most of these problems.
Yeah,
I'm actually interested to hear maybe from Brian on. There are classic one topic you haven't talked about is supply chain attacks. So one of the things I worry about is, again, developers bringing in code, just like open source code, where we have not vetted them, and there are not that many tools and technology to help with that. I don't know how you folks are thinking about it at your company.
I think, Brian, we're all saying you're supposed to fix this. So what's the answer?
Well, good news is we got a lot of ideas about how to fix it. I guess what I would say is I could argue both sides, right? I think that if you wind the clock forward, do I think that AI could be the existential threat? Unequivocally, yes. On the other side, do I think that there's a lot of fear and a lot that's been written recently about how AI, well, let's call it in a word, the singularity, or how AI becomes more intelligent. Let's just maybe settle down for a second, right? Like ChatGPT was trained on web content, right? And while it may feel at times like it's sentient and it's conscious, it's not, right? So we are still a ways away from this technology. Like so far, Terminator has not shown up outside my door, right? So we still have a little bit to go there. So everybody can maybe settle down for a second. But I think that some of the ways that when you talk about supply chain, we can empower CISOs and security teams is by implementing artificial or AI and ML in a responsible way. So with a curated data set trained by security researchers and experts, leveraging a transformer architecture to do things like when a developer is copying and pasting code from the new Stack Overflow, which is GPT or Bard or whatever, and they're pasting it into their IDE, at that point, we can invoke an automated mechanism to scan that code and identify whether or not it's going to increase your supply chain risk. Equally, another use case is as a developer is typing, an import statement in pick your favorite language, right? In Java, import space and whatever the library is there a policy that enables a security team on the back end to be able to define a control that when a developer chooses or elects to bring in a library or a version of a library that's not supported because there are known nefarious actors contributing to it, or there are known vulnerabilities in that library, prevent that from ever being ingested. I'll give you a third and final use case before we close this one out is how do we prevent the inclusion or the adoption of containers or base operating systems that our containers are built from that we know contain vulnerabilities, and how do we put in place AI mechanisms that can detect the vulnerability and is able to respond to them. So I think that the right answer here is we've got to recognize or be cognizant that this is a incredibly powerful technology. The toothpaste is out of the tube, right? There's no putting it back at this point. GPT-2 and the transformer architecture is available publicly. People will use it in a nefarious way. There's no question. So the bigger question is, how do we embrace it to achieve better business and safer business outcomes? And how do we put in place the guardrails to prevent us from, I don't know, Bala, if we can prevent large language models from talking to each other. I think if you're worried about if AI is going to be the existential threat, I think that's the chance, right? Because the connected nature and the networked nature of large language models who learn from each other, right? I mean, that's plenty of examples have been given this week where if you have a doctor that's seen 100 patients or a doctor that's seen 1,000 patients, right? If they could share knowledge with the doctor that's seen 1,000 patients, could share knowledge with the one that's seen 100, then we all know that how that knowledge can be shared across machines. So I think that could be an existential threat. But the question is, how do we leverage it for greater good and to drive better outcomes? And those are 3 examples. I have many more, but those are 3 examples that we are working on to help ensure that software security is a seamless part of the SDLC, but also recognizes that software can change at any point. And how do we empower security teams and developers to secure their code?
I would sort of
wait, guys, wait. We got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to have to cut. Lee, final thoughts here?
This has been a fabulous panel on a topic that we could run another 3 panels here, and who knows, we just might. For me, my takeaways are the singularity and sentient AI is not what keeps me up at night, but kind of human knowledge being kind of sucked out and kind of owned by kind of machines is something that perhaps is a little greater concern to me. I think we're going to be in an arms race for yet to come. But what I'm seeing here is a glimmer of optimism that hopefully this won't inhibit the powerful development and progress that AI and ML systems will bring.
All right. Well, what I get out of this is that someday my bot will be able to kick your bot's butt. And then the second thing I got out of this was make sure I know where the plug is, right? All right. Gentlemen, thanks for being on the show. Cody, take us home.
Happy to. Thank you, Mike. And to the rest of our panel, thank you so much for joining us on Techstrong Learning. It really is a pleasure having these panels and having everyone bring their expertise. It's just walk away learning a lot every time. So thank you all for being here. So I'd like to remind our audience that our session today was recorded. Following this, you will receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. Of course, you can find it also living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars. And be sure to look in the on-demand section where it will be waiting for you shortly. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing, they are Yashwant B, Kimberly S, Lou T, and Jennifer G. So to our 4 winners, keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. It should make its way over to you in about the next 48 hours. But if you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder just in case it happened to get filtered out. I'd like to thank the AI Infrastructure Alliance for sponsoring our program today. And to our audience, thank you so much for hanging out with us for this past hour. We really appreciate your time, and we want to hear your feedback. So as soon as we close out, there will be a survey that pops up. Let us know what you thought about this panel, or if maybe you have topic suggestions for an upcoming panel, please let us know. We want to deliver you the content that you want to watch. So on that note, thank you all so much for being here. You may now disconnect, and to our speakers, thank you all once more.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah.